In a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood surrounded by lush greenery and manicured lawns, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. The residents of this suburban community prided themselves on their pristine homes, orderly streets, and the sparkling lake that sat at the heart of it all. This wasn't just any lake. It was a shimmering expanse of water where families gathered for picnics, kids learned to fish, and couples strolled along its banks during golden sunsets. It was the crown jewel of the neighborhood, a place everyone cherished. The Homeowners Association, HOA, played a big role in keeping things running smoothly. They had rules for everything: how tall your grass could grow, what color you could paint your front door, and even how loud your backyard barbecue parties could get. Most people followed these rules without complaint because they wanted to keep the neighborhood looking perfect. But not everyone agreed with the HOA's methods, especially when it came to enforcing some of their stricter policies. Enter Marcus Thompson, a successful businessman who had recently purchased a weekend home in the area. Marcus was a tall, confident man with a warm smile and an easygoing demeanor. He wasn't one to make waves, but he also didn't shy away from standing up for himself when needed. Marcus loved spending time outdoors, and the idea of having a peaceful retreat near the lake appealed to him. Little did the other residents know, however, that Marcus had more than just a casual connection to the lake. He actually owned it. Yes, you read that right. The lake that everyone assumed belonged to the HOA or the city was, in fact, privately owned by Marcus. Years ago, as part of a larger real estate deal, he had acquired the land surrounding the lake and the water itself. At the time, it seemed like a smart investment, but Marcus never intended to flaunt his ownership. He liked the idea of blending in with the community, enjoying the lake quietly while letting others continue using it as they always had. One sunny Saturday morning, Marcus decided to spend the day fishing. He loaded up his sleek aluminum boat, complete with a small motor, and all the gear he needed for a relaxing afternoon on the water. As he prepared to launch the boat from the dock, he noticed a woman walking briskly toward him. Her name was Karen Whitmore, and she was known throughout the neighborhood as the unofficial enforcer of the HOA's rules. Karen carried herself with an air of authority, always armed with a clipboard and a list of grievances. She rarely missed an opportunity to remind her neighbors about the importance of following the HOA guidelines. Karen stopped a few feet away from Marcus and gave him a tight-lipped smile. "Good morning," she said, her tone polite but firm. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to ask you to move your boat." Marcus looked up, surprised. "Move my boat? Why?" "Well," Karen began, glancing pointedly at the vessel, "it's creating quite an eyesore here. The HOA has very specific aesthetic standards, and unfortunately, your boat doesn't quite meet them." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "An eyesore? My boat is parked exactly where it's supposed to be. And besides, isn't this a shared space for everyone to enjoy?" Karen shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for resistance. "Yes, but we have to think about the overall appearance of the area. Your boat, well, it's just too flashy. It draws attention away from the natural beauty of the lake." Marcus couldn't help but chuckle. Flashy? His boat was far from extravagant. It was practical and functional, nothing more. Still, he tried to remain calm. "Look, Karen, I understand the HOA wants to maintain certain standards, but my boat isn't violating any rules. I checked before bringing it here." Karen's expression hardened. "Regardless, I think it would be best if you moved it somewhere else. Maybe closer to your property line." She said this last part with a dismissive wave of her hand, as though suggesting Marcus hide his boat out of sight. At this point, Marcus felt a flicker of irritation. There was something patronizing about the way Karen spoke to him, as if she doubted his ability to follow simple instructions, or worse, as if he didn't belong in the neighborhood at all. But instead of arguing further, Marcus nodded politely. "I'll consider it," he said, knowing full well he wouldn't budge an inch. As Karen walked away, satisfied that she had asserted her authority, Marcus shook his head. He knew people like Karen existed in every community, those who thrived on control and micromanagement. But he hadn't expected to encounter one so soon after moving in. What Karen didn't realize was that her little power play was about to backfire in ways she couldn't imagine. Word of the confrontation spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some residents sympathized with Marcus, thinking Karen had overstepped yet again. Others sided with her, believing that Marcus should conform to the HOA's expectations. Among the gossipers were members of the local fishing club, a tight-knit group of enthusiasts who frequented the lake almost daily. They saw Marcus as an outsider who might disrupt their routine, unaware of the bombshell he was about to drop. Little did anyone know, Marcus's decision to stay silent about his ownership of the lake was about to change everything, for Karen, for the fishing club, and for the entire neighborhood. The days following Marcus's encounter with Karen passed quietly, but beneath the surface tensions simmered. Karen, convinced she had asserted her authority effectively, returned to her usual routine of patrolling the neighborhood for rule violations. She made notes on her clipboard about overgrown hedges, mismatched mailbox colors, and even the placement of garden gnomes. To her, these minor infractions were battles in a larger war to preserve the integrity of the community. But deep down, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus hadn't truly backed down. Meanwhile, Marcus went about his business, seemingly unfazed by the incident. He spent his weekends fishing on the lake, enjoying the tranquility it offered. His boat remained docked exactly where it had been when Karen first approached him. If anything, Marcus seemed more determined than ever to use the lake as he pleased. He wasn't trying to provoke anyone. He simply didn't see why he should bend to unreasonable demands. Word of the confrontation between Marcus and Karen continued to spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The HOA board members, a group of residents who prided themselves on maintaining order, began discussing the matter at their weekly meetings. Some were sympathetic to Marcus, arguing that Karen had been unnecessarily aggressive. Others sided, with Karen believing that Marcus needed to fall in line if he wanted to fit in. Karen, for her part, was growing increasingly frustrated. She had expected Marcus to comply after their conversation, but instead he appeared to be ignoring her entirely. This defiance infuriated her. After all, she saw herself as the guardian of the neighborhood's standards, someone who worked tirelessly to ensure everyone followed the rules. In her mind, Marcus was not only challenging her authority, but also threatening the harmony of the entire community. Determined to resolve the issue once and for all, Karen decided to escalate the situation. She drafted a formal letter on behalf of the HOA, addressed to Marcus, demanding that he remove his boat from the lakefront area immediately. The letter cited vague sections of the HOA bylaws, claiming that Marcus's boat violated aesthetic guidelines and disrupted the natural beauty of the lake. Karen personally delivered the letter to Marcus's doorstep, feeling a surge of satisfaction as she slid it into his mailbox. When Marcus found the letter later that evening, he read it carefully, his expression unreadable. At first, he considered ignoring it altogether. After all, he knew he wasn't violating any real rules. But as he thought about it more, Marcus realized this was an opportunity, a chance to address the underlying issues in the neighborhood head-on. He decided to attend the next HOA meeting, which was scheduled for the following week. News of Marcus's decision to show up at the meeting sent ripples through the community. For many residents, HOA meetings were mundane affairs, filled with discussions about landscaping budgets and holiday decorations. But this time, anticipation buzzed in the air. Everyone wanted to see how Marcus would respond to Karen's accusations. Would he apologize and move his boat, or would he stand his ground? On the night of the meeting, the small community center where the HOA gathered was unusually crowded. Residents squeezed into folding chairs, whispering among themselves as they waited for the session to begin. Karen took her seat at the front of the room, clutching her clipboard tightly. She looked confident, even smug, as if she already knew how the evening would unfold. When Marcus walked in, the room fell silent. He carried himself with quiet assurance, nodding politely to those who greeted him. As the meeting started, Karen wasted no time bringing up the issue of Marcus's boat. Standing up, she cleared her throat and began reading aloud from her notes. "As you all know," she said, addressing the room, The HOA has received numerous complaints about the presence of a certain boat near the main dock. This boat is not only visually unappealing but also sets a dangerous precedent for disregarding our community standards. We must act quickly to prevent further disruptions. Marcus listened patiently, his face impassive. When Karen finished speaking, there was a brief pause before Marcus stood up. The room tensed, unsure of what to expect. Marcus smiled slightly, then spoke in a calm, measured voice. "I appreciate your concerns, Karen," he began, "but I think it's important we address something here tonight. Before we proceed any further, I want to clarify one thing. I own this lake." The words hung in the air like thunder. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then slowly, murmurs erupted throughout the room. People exchanged shocked glances, some leaning forward in disbelief. Karen, standing frozen at the front, looked as though she'd been struck by lightning. Her clipboard slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. Marcus reached into his bag and pulled out a folder containing official documents, property deeds, legal agreements, and environmental permits, all proving his ownership of the lake and the surrounding land. He handed copies to the HOA board members, who flipped through them with wide eyes. It was undeniable. Marcus wasn't just another resident. He was the rightful owner of the very resource the entire community depended on. As the reality sank, and Karen struggled to regain her composure. This can't be right," she stammered. "We've always assumed the lake belonged to the HOA." "That assumption," Marcus replied gently, "is understandable. However, the truth is that I've owned the lake for years. I chose not to make a fuss about it because I value privacy and prefer to avoid unnecessary drama. But now that my ownership has come into question, I feel it's important to set the record straight." The room erupted into chaos as residents bombarded Marcus with questions. How long had he owned the lake? Why hadn't he mentioned it before? What did this mean for the fishing club and other activities? Marcus held up his hands, signaling for calm. "Let me assure you," he said, "I have no intention of disrupting anyone's enjoyment of the lake. I've allowed the fishing club and other recreational activities to continue under informal agreements. However, recent events have made it clear that some changes are necessary. Moving forward, I plan to work with the HOA to establish clearer guidelines and ensure the lake remains a safe, sustainable environment for everyone." His words brought a mix of relief and unease to the room. While some residents admired Marcus's willingness to collaborate, others, particularly Karen, felt a creeping sense of dread. For Karen, this revelation was more than just embarrassing. It threatened to dismantle the authority she had wielded for so long. As the meeting adjourned, Marcus left the community center feeling a sense of vindication. He hadn't sought out this confrontation, but he knew it was inevitable. Now, with the truth out in the open, the dynamics of the neighborhood were about to shift dramatically. And for Karen, the woman who had tried to dictate how Marcus lived his life, the consequences of her actions were only beginning to unfold. The days following the explosive HOA meeting were nothing short of chaotic. The revelation that Marcus owned the lake spread like wildfire, not just within the neighborhood but to surrounding communities as well. People whispered about it at grocery stores, coffee shops, and even during their morning walks. For many residents, it was hard to wrap their heads around the fact that the lake they had taken for granted, treating it almost like a public resource, was actually private property. And now, the man who owned it was no longer content to stay in the shadows. Karen, on the other hand, was reeling. She had spent years positioning herself as the enforcer of rules, the person who kept the neighborhood running smoothly. But now, her authority felt hollow. Her clipboard, once a symbol of control, seemed useless in the face of Marcus's legal ownership. Worse still, her reputation was crumbling. Neighbors who had once nodded along with her demands were now questioning her tactics and her motives. Some even joked quietly about how she had tried to boss around the actual owner of the lake. Marcus, however, wasn't interested in gloating or punishing anyone. He understood the shock his announcement had caused and wanted to give everyone time to process it. Still, he knew that simply owning the lake didn't absolve him of responsibility. If anything, It gave him an even greater obligation to ensure the lake remained a safe, enjoyable, and sustainable space for everyone who used it, including those in the fishing club. With this in mind, Marcus decided to take a closer look at how the lake was being managed. He hired an environmental consultant to assess its condition and review the practices of the fishing club. What they found was troubling. Years of unchecked activity had left the lake in worse shape than Marcus had realized. There were signs of pollution from discarded fishing lines, plastic waste, and leftover bait containers littering the shoreline. In addition, overfishing had disrupted the ecosystem, leading to a noticeable decline in fish populations. Even more concerning, the fishing club had been operating without proper permits, relying instead on informal agreements that technically held no legal weight. Armed with this information, Marcus called another meeting with the HOA board and key members of the fishing club. This time the atmosphere was markedly different. Gone was the tension of the previous gathering. Instead, there was an air of nervous anticipation. Everyone knew Marcus held all the cards, and they were eager to hear what he planned to do next. When Marcus arrived, he carried a folder filled with reports and recommendations from the environmental consultant. After greeting everyone warmly, he got straight to the point. "I want to start by thanking you all for coming," he began. "As you know, I own the lake, and I've always intended for it to be a shared resource. However, recent findings have shown that its health is at risk. If we don't take action soon, the lake could suffer irreversible damage." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "The fishing club has been a beloved part of this community for years, and I have no desire to shut it down. But moving forward, we need to operate under clear guidelines. That means obtaining the necessary permits, implementing eco-friendly practices, and ensuring that the lake is protected for future generations." The room fell silent as Marcus outlined his plan. He proposed limiting the number of fishing licenses issued each year to prevent overfishing. He suggested organizing regular cleanup events to remove trash and debris from the shoreline. And perhaps most importantly, he emphasized the need for stricter enforcement of environmental regulations. Violators, he warned, would face consequences, including potential bans from using the lake. For Karen, sitting quietly in the corner, these proposals felt like a direct attack. She had long championed the fishing club, seeing it as one of her proudest achievements within the HOA. Now Marcus's reforms threatened to dismantle everything she had worked so hard to build. As much as she tried to mask her emotions, her discomfort was obvious. Her hands trembled slightly as she scribbled notes on her ever-present clipboard, though she barely looked up throughout the meeting. Other residents, however, were surprisingly receptive to Marcus's ideas. Many admitted they had noticed the lake's declining condition but hadn't known what to do about it. They appreciated Marcus's willingness to step in and provide leadership where it was sorely needed. Some even volunteered to help organize the cleanup events or serve on a new committee tasked with monitoring the lake's health. By the end of the meeting, a tentative agreement had been reached. The fishing club would continue to operate, but only under the new guidelines Marcus had laid out. Members would be required to attend workshops on sustainable fishing practices, and the club itself would contribute funds toward conservation efforts. In return, Marcus promised to maintain open communication with the HOA and keep the lake accessible to the community. As people filed out of the room, Karen lingered behind, her face pale and drawn. She approached Marcus hesitantly, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. I just want to say thank you," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "For letting us keep using the lake, I mean." Marcus studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You're welcome, Karen. But let's be clear. This isn't about me letting anyone do anything. It's about working together to protect something we all care about. If you're serious about helping, there's plenty of work to be done." Karen nodded quickly, avoiding eye contact. Whether she truly meant her gratitude or was simply trying to save face, Marcus couldn't tell, and honestly, he didn't care. What mattered was that progress was being made. In the weeks that followed, Marcus threw himself into the task of revitalizing the lake. He organized the first cleanup event, which drew dozens of volunteers from the neighborhood. Together, they removed bags of trash, cleared invasive plants, and planted native vegetation along the shoreline. The transformation was remarkable, and for the first time in years the lake began to look healthier and more vibrant. Meanwhile, attitudes within the community started to shift. Residents who had once dismissed Marcus as an outsider now saw him as a leader, a man who cared deeply about the environment and the well-being of the neighborhood. Even some of Karen's former supporters began to question her methods, realizing that her obsession with rules often came at the expense of genuine solutions. For Karen, the change was devastating. Without her role as the HOA enforcer, she felt adrift, unsure of where she fit in anymore. Her attempts to rally support for her old ways fell flat, and she found herself increasingly isolated. Eventually, she resigned from her position on the HOA board, citing personal reasons. No one tried to stop her. As the dust settled, Marcus reflected on everything that had happened. He hadn't set out to make waves when he moved to the neighborhood. He'd simply wanted a quiet place to relax and enjoy nature. But sometimes, life has a way of pushing you into situations you never expected. By standing up for himself, and for the lake, he had sparked a chain reaction that transformed not just the physical landscape but the community itself. As the weeks turned into months, Marcus's influence on the neighborhood continued to grow. The initial shock of his ownership revelation had given way to a sense of cautious optimism. Residents who had once viewed him with suspicion now saw him as a stabilizing force, a man who cared deeply about the community and its shared resources. But while many embraced the changes he brought, others struggled to adapt. None more so than Karen Whitmore. Karen's resignation from the HOA board left a void in the leadership structure, one that was quickly filled by newer voices eager to collaborate with Marcus. These individuals were younger, more open-minded, and genuinely interested in working together for the betterment of the neighborhood. They formed a new committee focused on sustainability, with Marcus serving as an advisor. Together, they implemented initiatives like installing solar-powered lights along the lake path, organizing monthly workshops on environmental conservation, and creating a fund to support local wildlife rehabilitation efforts. But Karen wasn't ready to fade into obscurity just yet. She still attended HOA meetings, though she rarely spoke up. Instead, she sat quietly in the back, clutching her clipboard like a relic of a bygone era. Her presence became almost ghostly, haunting the edges of conversations without contributing anything meaningful. Some residents felt sorry for her, others barely noticed her anymore. Either way, it was clear that her days as the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer were over. Meanwhile, the fishing club underwent a dramatic transformation. Under Marcus's guidance, its members adopted sustainable practices that aligned with the new regulations. Gone were the days of reckless overfishing and careless littering. In their place came a culture of respect for the lake, its ecosystem, and the privilege of using such a precious resource. Members took pride in teaching newcomers about responsible fishing techniques and participated enthusiastically in cleanup events. Slowly but surely, the club began to rebuild its reputation within the community. Marcus also introduced another groundbreaking idea: opening limited public access to the lake for families outside the neighborhood. This decision was met with mixed reactions at first. Some residents worried that allowing outsiders onto their lake would lead to overcrowding or damage to the environment. Others feared it might dilute the exclusivity they cherished. But Marcus reassured them, explaining that controlled access could foster goodwill and strengthen ties between the neighborhood and the broader community. To test the concept, Marcus organized a free family day at the lake. Local schools, churches, and community groups were invited to participate. Families arrived early in the morning, setting up picnic blankets near the shore and renting kayaks and paddle boards provided by volunteers. Kids giggled as they dipped their toes into the water, while parents marveled at how beautiful the lake looked after the recent restoration efforts. By the end of the day, even the most skeptical residents admitted the event had been a success. Positive feedback inspired Marcus to make these public access days a regular occurrence. He worked with local businesses to sponsor equipment rentals, and partnered with environmental organizations to offer educational programs about water conservation. The initiative not only brought joy to countless families, but also raised awareness about the importance of protecting natural resources. For many attendees, it was their first time experiencing the lake, and they left vowing to return. Back in the neighborhood, attitudes toward Marcus had shifted dramatically. What started as quiet curiosity blossomed into genuine admiration. Residents appreciated his fairness, his vision, and his willingness to listen. Even those who had initially sided with Karen during the boat incident now acknowledged that Marcus had acted out of principle rather than spite. His calm demeanor and thoughtful approach earned him trust and respect, qualities Karen had never possessed. For Karen, watching all this unfold was excruciating. Every step forward felt like a personal defeat. She had spent years cultivating her image as the guardian of the neighborhood's standards, only to see it crumble under the weight of reality. Worse still, she couldn't shake the feeling that people pitied her. Conversations stopped abruptly when she entered a room. Invitations to social gatherings dwindled to almost nothing. It was as if the community had collectively decided to move on without her. One evening, unable to bear the loneliness any longer, Karen knocked on Marcus's door. He answered with mild surprise, inviting her inside. The house was warm and inviting, with large windows overlooking the lake. Karen hesitated before speaking, unsure of what to say. I wanted to apologize, she finally managed, her voice trembling. For everything. For how I treated you when you first moved here. For assuming things about you that weren't true. Marcus studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Thank you, Karen. That takes courage. She swallowed hard, tears welling up in her eyes. I know I messed up. I thought I was doing the right thing, keeping order, protecting the neighborhood, but I realize now that I was wrong about a lot of things. Marcus gestured for her to sit down, offering her a glass of water. We all make mistakes, he said gently. What matters is what we do next. If you're serious about making amends, there are plenty of ways to contribute. The lake needs caretakers, and so does this community. Karen nodded, wiping her eyes. I'd like that. To help, I mean. If you'll let me. Marcus smiled. Of course, everyone deserves a second chance. From that day forward, Karen began volunteering regularly at the lake. At first, her efforts were tentative, picking up trash or helping set up chairs for events. But as time went on, she grew more confident, taking on bigger responsibilities like coordinating cleanup schedules and mentoring new volunteers. Though she would never regain her former status, she found solace in knowing she was part of something meaningful. As the seasons changed, so too did the neighborhood. The lake became a symbol of unity, a testament to what could be achieved when people worked together toward a common goal. And at the center of it all stood Marcus, not as an outsider looking in, but as a leader who had earned the trust and gratitude of an entire community. Though challenges lay ahead, Marcus knew the foundation had been laid for lasting change. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. After all, sometimes the hardest battles yield the sweetest victories. As the months rolled by, the neighborhood transformed in ways no one could have predicted at the start of Marcus's arrival. The lake, once a source of tension and division, had become the heart of unity and collaboration. It wasn't just cleaner and healthier. It was alive with activity, laughter, and shared purpose. Families gathered for picnics under the shade of newly planted trees. Children learned to fish responsibly during community workshops, and kayakers glided across the water as the sun dipped below the horizon. What had once been a quiet, exclusive retreat had blossomed into a vibrant hub of connection and joy. Marcus played a central role in this transformation, but he didn't seek the spotlight. Instead, he worked quietly behind the scenes, ensuring that every initiative was inclusive, sustainable, and forward-thinking. His leadership style was collaborative rather than authoritarian, inviting input from residents and encouraging them to take ownership of their community. This approach earned him not just respect but genuine affection. People often joked that Marcus had single-handedly turned the HOA into something they actually wanted to be part of, a far cry from the rigid, rule-obsessed organization it used to be. Karen, too, had undergone her own quiet evolution. Her initial apology to Marcus marked the beginning of a long journey toward redemption. At first, her efforts were met with skepticism. Some neighbors whispered that she was only volunteering to save face or curry favor with Marcus. But over time, Karen proved her sincerity through consistent, selfless action. She showed up early for cleanup events, stayed late to organize supplies, and even spearheaded a campaign to install educational signs around the lake, highlighting its ecological importance. Her transformation didn't go unnoticed. One evening, during a community potluck by the lake, a young boy approached Karen shyly, holding out a handmade card. "Thank you for helping fix the lake," it read in wobbly letters. Karen blinked back tears as she knelt down to thank him. That moment, small though it was, symbolized how far she'd come, not just in others' eyes, but in her own. The fishing club, meanwhile, had become a model of sustainability. Members proudly wore T-shirts emblazoned with slogans like "Catch and Release" and "Protect Our Waters." They hosted annual tournaments with eco-friendly themes, donating proceeds to local conservation projects. Marcus attended these events occasionally, always greeted warmly by participants who now saw him as an ally rather than an adversary. Even longtime members admitted that the stricter regulations had improved their experience, making each catch feel more rewarding. But perhaps the most significant change was the shift in mindset throughout the neighborhood. Residents began to view themselves not as passive consumers of amenities but as active stewards of their environment. Inspired by Marcus's example, they started tackling other issues plaguing the community: potholes on side streets, neglected playground equipment, and even outdated HOA policies. Committees sprang up spontaneously, driven by volunteers eager to make a difference. For the first time in years, the HOA meetings were filled with energy and optimism instead of complaints and finger-pointing. One crisp autumn afternoon, Marcus stood on the dock overlooking the lake, watching as families enjoyed the scenery. A group of teenagers laughed as they paddled canoes, while an elderly couple strolled hand in hand along the shore. The sight filled him with pride, not because he had orchestrated it all, but because the community had risen to meet the challenge. Together. Just then, Karen approached him, carrying a thermos of hot cider. "Mind if I join you?" she asked tentatively. "Not at all," Marcus replied with a smile, gesturing for her to sit beside him. They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Karen spoke. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad you moved here. You've changed things for the better." Marcus chuckled softly. "I didn't do it alone. Everyone pitched in, including you." Karen shook her head, smiling faintly. "Maybe. But none of it would have happened without you stepping in when you did. You held up a mirror to us, showed us where we were going wrong. And honestly, I needed that wake-up call." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes we all need reminders that there's a bigger picture. None of us are perfect, but we can always strive to do better." Karen took a sip of her cider, gazing out at the sparkling water. "Do you ever think about selling the lake? I mean, owning something like this must come with its headaches." Marcus grinned. "Every now and then. But then I remember why I bought it in the first place, to preserve it. As long as people treat it with care, I don't see any reason to let it go." His words lingered in the air as the two of them watched the sun sink lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. In that moment, it felt like everything had fallen into place, not perfectly, but authentically. The neighborhood wasn't utopia, and conflicts still arose from time to time. But there was a newfound resilience, a willingness to listen and adapt that hadn't existed before. Later that evening, as Marcus walked home, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had never intended to become a catalyst for change. He simply wanted a peaceful place to escape the demands of his busy life. Yet sometimes, life pushes you in unexpected directions. By standing firm against unfairness and using his privilege responsibly, Marcus had sparked a ripple effect that touched countless lives, including his own. The final chapter of this story wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about growth. both individual and collective. Karen had learned humility and accountability, shedding her rigid need for control. The residents had embraced cooperation and stewardship, finding strength in unity. And Marcus? He had discovered a deeper sense of purpose, proving that leadership isn't about wielding power, but inspiring others to find theirs. As winter approached, blanketing the neighborhood in a soft layer of snow, the lake remained a beacon of hope. Its surface froze over, reflecting the twinkling lights strung along nearby trees. Children skated hand in hand, while adults sipped hot chocolate around crackling fire pits. The scene was simple yet profound, a testament to what happens when people come together with shared values and a common goal. And so, the tale of Marcus Thompson and the lake came full circle. What began as a clash over a boat ended as a celebration of community, resilience, and the enduring power of kindness. It reminded everyone that even the smallest actions, like choosing understanding over judgment or compassion over control, can create waves of positive change. After all, lakes may belong to individuals, but their beauty belongs to everyone.